Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 2, or if you're counting from the beginning, Episode 14 for the entire show. And, before we get started, if you like this content, be sure to subscribe. If you are joining us on YouTube, be sure also to like and tap the bell for more videos in the future. And then before we get started, also, quick reminder that this show is sponsored and made possible by NextWave Partners. NextWave Partners are experts in the renewables, infrastructure, ESG, climate tech, and tech recruitment businesses. So if you're looking to either grow your team or maybe take your career to the next step, definitely reach out to the team at NextWave. You can reach out to them generally at info@next-wavepartners.com, or feel free to connect with a consultant that's in your region. If you go over to LinkedIn and find a consultant that kind of covers the area you're looking into, you can do that as well. So with that, let's get into today's episode details. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Ben Hood, the co-founder and CTO of WattBuy. They're doing some pretty interesting stuff there. At first, when we arranged this conversation, I was a little bit curious how I would kind of get the best value out of this episode and really share kind of what they're doing in regards to climate tech space, because some of their software is more focused on kind of generally purchasing energy and energy usage. But in reality, I was very glad that we had this conversation. It turned out quite well. There's a lot of detail that Ben was able to share and how they're actually affecting the market, kind of making it much more transparent for people to buy their energy, and as well as sharing who is actually using the most energy, so that there's no way to hide, right? If you're somebody who consumes a lot of energy, I guess you're a little bit out of luck. But if you're somebody who's conscious of these things, and you'll be armed essentially with their technology that they're developing and continuing to create more partnerships with, you'll be armed to very well make sure that you're being rewarded for using less energy. So it's a very interesting and insightful episode with Ben from WattBuy. And again, if I just be sure to take some notes along the way. Anything that's interesting to you, feel free to reach out after the episode. But without further ado, let's get into the episode with Ben. All right, welcome to the podcast, Ben. Appreciate you joining us today. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you jumping on here. So I guess just for everybody listening, could you start with giving us an introduction to yourself and how you ended up with WattBuy?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Ben Hood. I've been the CTO of WattBuy for the last 2 or 3 years. I founded it with my partner Naman Trivedi. And so we actually kind of came to this because he was living in Washington, D.C., and I was in Virginia. And we started hearing about deregulated electricity opportunities. We found that actually a lot of people were kind of being scammed in Washington, D.C. When they were presented with electricity options. And we found that there were a tremendous number of opportunities for people to save money on their electricity and to be able to choose like renewable options on their electricity. But they weren't able to make good decisions because you really have to know what your electricity usage is and kind of how you're using electricity to be able to make these good decisions on which plan makes the most sense for you. And we got pretty excited about that because it was a question that had the right answer. If you had the right data, then you were able to make the right answer and choose the lowest cost electricity plan, or the plan that actually has the lowest carbon footprint, by choosing a wind or a solar powered plan. And so we dove in and decided like we should create a company that helps people navigate these deregulated electricity markets and be able to pull in the right amount of information and present it to people so that they can actually make good decisions about saving money on their electricity. So we've built out an electricity estimation model so that tells you how much electricity you're probably using based on your house characteristics over time. And then we apply that to every plan that's available in your particular area to be able to come up with an option that says, hey, here's the plan that's for you. And this is available in about 13 US states where people can choose who their electricity provider is.
Okay, so this is interesting. I think a lot of people probably are not familiar with this term. So could you explain kind of the difference between regulated and deregulated energy markets?
Absolutely, yeah. Because this is actually, I grew up in Arkansas. I moved to Virginia. We actually don't have deregulated electricity where I live now, so this is not like a normal thing. But in about 13 states, in Texas, and then a whole bunch of states in the Northeast, from Ohio to Maine, you can actually choose who produces your electricity, and so they're called retail electric providers. So they actually, what state governments did in each of these states is they divided up the electricity system into two different entities. On the one side, they have distribution. So those are the people who actually take the wires and the poles directly to your house, and they're the company that they are a monopoly. So you choose where you want to live, and you get one distributor. So you don't get to choose who is your distributor. And that makes sense because you don't want to have 30 different lines coming into your house, like to be able to
Yeah.
choose who your distributor is. So those are usually dictated by the state government and the Public Utility Commission in each state, and they're regulated by in those ways. However, then they separated out the generation side of the electricity system so that different companies could start to compete on finding customers and then generating the electricity for those customers. So those companies are called, in various states, they're called retail electric providers or ESCOs, electricity service companies. They are the generators, or they are the retail electric providers who are talking directly to the customer and generating the electricity for those customers. And those are the companies that compete for your business. So usually in a deregulated electricity state, you'll have the one bill, but you'll have two different sections on the bill. You'll have the distribution section, which is based on the company who has to deliver electricity directly to your house, and then the generation side, which is about half your bill, which is a company that you can choose to lock in your price for 12 months, or you can choose a company that has 100% wind, or you can choose a company that gives you free electricity from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and then you pay a little bit higher electricity from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there's a lot of different options like this that you can choose from, but it's also often very difficult for people to figure out those options, and that's where we jump in.
Okay, got it. So it's kind of like, I mean, this, I don't know if people listening know this term, but it's kind of like a PPA, but for individual homes.
Yeah, yeah, that's not crazy. That's not a crazy like sort of an analogy. And most of this came about sort of in the late '90s when state governments were trying to take a look at the electricity sector and saying, how can we make this better for consumers? How can we innovate in these areas? Because the honest truth is that our electricity system was basically designed like by Edison, in like the
Mm-hmm.
late 1800s. So it hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed a little bit, but a lot of things are sort of still there, sort of like 100 years on. And so they wanted to introduce a whole lot of sort of innovation. Some states have sort of pulled back on it. Some states have still considered it. There was I think there was a referendum in Nevada, and there was a referendum in Florida thinking about introducing these deregulated electricity options. But it was basically all with this eye towards saying, like, how do we modernize the grid? How do we make sure that we're putting enough investment into the grid so that we can make a resilient and innovative grid, and not just assume that what worked 100 years ago is still going to work today.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting, the kind of the broader scale of how this is innovation happens, right? I think it's interesting because we have 4-lane highway, right? If all the cars there can only go 45 miles an hour, even if you build a new one, it still can't pass them because it's all full, right? But I'm curious if you have any insight as to which states, when they decided to kind of go with this innovative route and try to see how can we make it better, what was the impetus and what is kind of leading towards that? Because I think that, as a lot of people in the renewables and clean tech space, we're always trying to do our best to encourage the people around us, our local politicians, whatever, to advance these things that just seem foreign to them because they're just not familiar. So what is kind of the impetus behind those things, and how can we help as individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the impetus behind it was this purely monopoly system, which still happens in some places around the U.S. In the Southeast, they still have a whole lot of monopolies, and and in those situations, one company owns the coal-fired power plant. They own the wires that go from it. They own the distribution wires. They own the transmission wires, and then they go directly to the house. There's very little pressure on that company to do anything different, right? And that's actually one of the things that that we've noticed with the introduction of wholesale electricity markets is that where there is not a wholesale electricity market, so when generators don't really have to compete on cost, coal-fired power plants hang around, right? Somebody has paid off a coal-fired power plant 25 years ago or 30 years ago. They built it 50 years ago and they've already paid it off. So there's very little pressure to retire that coal-fired power plant. That's kind of in the monopoly kind of scenario. Whereas when you do have like a wholesale electricity market, when you do have this kind of deregulation and you have different companies competing, then that's when solar and wind start to look super attractive, because on the per kilowatt basis, once you get them out there, they can start to generate electricity at a lower cost than the coal-fired power plant if you took like the cost of the coal-fired power plant into consideration. So what I would say is for the company, for the people that are in deregulated electricity options, to be able to look at the solar options, to be able to look at the wind options, but also to look at like the time of use or the load shaping options, because a lot of the electricity capacity that we have to generate now is based on a peak load, right? So it's really based on those 6 days in July and August in the summer in Texas from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. when everybody's home, they're driving home from work and they're flipping up the air conditioning. So it's actually, we've created this whole electricity system based on that peak load kind of scenario. And so if you're looking to kind of cut down the carbon footprint, then you can go with wind, you can go with solar, but you can also go with like a load shaping scenario where you're paying more for your electricity during the day, but less at night or less on the weekends, because that will also help the grid become more efficient, and we can only build out the capacity that we really need.
That's interesting. So basically, I think it's similar. I've talked to some people in the building tech space where they're trying to understand how much energy usage they as a commercial building have during the day. This allows, individuals and, residential people to understand how much energy are we using? Can we maybe wash the clothes later tonight? Like when can we do these things? And this can help the entire grid to just kind of lower the load. So that's interesting. I guess, maybe could you give a couple more, like some more detail and kind of maybe some analogies too, for anybody who might not understand, what you guys are able to do? Essentially, it's like you're creating a marketplace hypothetically.
Yep.
So could you maybe dive into that a little bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. So what we do specifically is we have partnered with a whole bunch of these retail electric providers. So we have maybe about 30 different brands that are on our marketplace, on our website. And what we do for all of those is we pull in all of their different rates, and then we have to characterize the rates so that we understand like how much your bill would be. So we do some machine learning to actually sort of tease apart the actual rates that are available in that area, so that we can create them as like a formula, like a mathematical formula. And then what we do on the usage side, so we have like how much it's going to cost based on a particular electricity usage, but then we have to figure out how much somebody uses, how much electricity somebody uses. Obviously, we could get that from asking somebody like to go look at their electricity bill. But I work in electricity. I have no idea where my electricity bill is. I have no idea how much electricity I used last month. Like, it's just not something that's off the top of my head. But I do know what my address is. God willing, everybody knows what their address is.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've decided that is the level of information that we want to ask somebody. So we say, what is your address? They put in their address, then we go grab from either Zillow, like a real estate website, or from assessor's data that's publicly available. We grab all of the information on the house characteristics. So we know the age of the house, the square footage, how many stories it is, whether it's a heat pump or it's central air conditioning, whatever. So we grab all of that information, and then we have a machine learning model that actually pulls the electricity usage over a data set that we have access to, and then we pull in what the typical electricity usage is going to be for a house of these characteristics in this particular area. So we grab like the dark sky weather API so that we can get sort of like street level weather information at a minute by minute. And then we apply those housing characteristics. So this house in this area with this weather pattern in this climate, what is the electricity usage that we think it's going to be? And then we create a 15-minute increment electricity model that says, okay, at 2 a.m., like it's probably not too hot, so you're probably not going to be running your air conditioning, like all the lights are off in the house, and so we expect that you're going to have this much, like your water heater might have popped on, your refrigerator might do a compressor cycle or something like that. But so you've got this low usage, and then we go up in the morning, and then we might go down in the middle of the day. So we create all of these models to understand exactly how your electricity usage is probably going to look like in your house. And then we apply that electricity model to every one of those plans that we've sucked in from our partners, so that we can come up with, it's going to be $87.23 on a typical February for you. If somebody has, this is kind of jargon, but if somebody has like a green button data, like if they know a little bit more about their electricity, they can submit it. If they have a bill, they can submit it. So we do more if you know more about your electricity. But the assumption is that most people don't really care. They want the answer from the back of the book, right? They want to know like what the answer is. And so that's what we try to do, is we try to create, we have these tremendous machine learning models that go in, that pull all of this data in, but then we get the answer from the back of the book. And then we say like, okay, here's the best plan for you, so that you can save the most money. And then here's also the best plan to save the most money, but it's a 100% renewable, so that you can make that really quick and easy decision. Okay, is the extra $3.85 per month, is that going to be good enough for me to do 100% renewable?
So it's giving people the option to understand which one they want to purchase. And I'm curious, there's a couple things kind of throughout that I'm curious about. So
Yeah.
first of all, have you guys partnered with any specific, I don't know if there's technology companies, like physical hardware technology companies that can help meter, that people, if they have this type of meter, that they can go and it's like, hey, read this button from you. Because my thing is, understanding when you're taking an average of a number of houses, for example, if you're the person using less than average, you're kind of getting the short end of the stick a little bit, right? By the person
Absolutely.
using more is getting, winning. So how, is there ways that people can be rewarded for purchasing other technology to put on their meter or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the great things is that a whole bunch of states have been pushing out smart meters, right? And so in some scenarios, we are able to work directly with those smart meters. So there's an initiative called Smart Meter Texas, that actually provides this data, specifically with smart meters that are deployed, and maybe 98% of Texas has these smart meters deployed, and so they already have this 15-minute increment data, which is beautiful, and we love to use that when we're able to do that. Con Edison in New York also has a program to share this data. PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric also have this data. So the states that have decided smart meter technology is worth deploying, we can start to use that data to that is already deployed and already out on customers' homes. We've done some I'll call them like science fair projects, basically on other technologies. There was a company called Effergy, that's a UK based company, that does some C clamps on your electricity mains to see like how much your electricity you're using. There were some older, Black & Decker even had one that read your meter. And then Sense is one of the companies that actually does this as well, and does sort of like sub-second querying technology to be able to understand your changes in electricity. And they do some fantastic stuff in terms of like disaggregation, right? To be able to say like, we think your refrigerator might be on its last legs because we see that it's doing the compressor cycle too often, something like that. We definitely like, we love that when we have access to that, but we are also cognizant of the fact that 80% of people might not care about that much,
Yeah,
so
I mean, I think though, to me, it seems interesting is that if there's an incentive, like I'm assuming the hardware obviously costs something up front, but if you're the type of person who like, if you're never home, if you're like me and you're always at the office, right?
yep.
You're incentivized to go buy this equipment and then go through, be like, hey, I literally use way less energy than my neighbor, so give
Or
me a cheaper price.
or to hook up your green button data from your Con Edison account, or your from exactly. So that is definitely the case, and we also find that what we are able to do as well, when somebody signs up for electricity through our platform, then we also see what their electricity usage is, and so then we can actually take our models, and we can say like, okay, we're finding that you're consistently 82%, of our model,
Mm,
or you're consistently 112% of our model. Maybe you bought a 3-bedroom house, but you have 5 kids and you just stuffed them into both of those extra
yeah.
bedrooms. That's all right. So we start to learn over time like what the natural variation of a particular
Mm,
house is,
got it.
and what the natural what your specific usage is, so that the next time around we're able to say like, hey, yeah, we know that you're probably going to be more like 110% of kind of the usage, so why don't we take a look at some of these other plans, or you're consistently under, so in Texas in particular, there are a bunch of plans that give you a certain rebate at a certain level. So if you hit 1,000 kWh, then you get a $50 or $60 rebate. If you're a guy that's always at the office, right, and you're not going to hit that 1,000 kWh, then that's a bad plan for you, because you're never going to get that $60 rebate. You're just going to pay the lower, the higher per kilowatt
Hmm.
charge, up to 1,000 kWh. So we'll push you in another direction. And we also very consistently say like, okay, we're going to look at the full year, because yeah, you might have a weird high bill in July, but if you're saving money, for the other 11 months of the year, then it's still going to be better for you to just take that
Yeah.
high bill in July. And you have to think about it across the entirety of a seasonal cycle.
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of almost like, with you have a car insurance provider, the longer you have it, they understand like how safe you are, you get better discounts, whatever. So that makes
Absolutely,
sense.
absolutely, that's right.
Um, how do people know if they're in a deregulated market and they can, have this opportunity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I mean, in our particular case, we obviously you can go onto our website and you can put your address in to see whether you're in a deregulated market. In general, though, some states have like more sort of competition than others. In Texas, it's been set up so that you basically have to choose a deregulated provider. You cannot go with a default provider.
Hmm.
And so in that case, there's 98% sort of like uptake, and people like already know about this, and they know that every year
Mm.
or 2 years or something like that, they're going to have to figure this out and go with a new provider. For the companies that are in, I'm sorry, the states that are in the Northeast, where there might not be as much competition. Rhode Island only has a few different competitive providers. Um, it's really more that you're probably seeing it when you are considering your electricity options, and so that's when you're moving in or when you have a big bill, and so then you start to
Mhm.
kind of look into it, and you start to try to educate yourself a little bit more about this. I just got a $300 bill. Like, is that normal? And can I do anything to correct that? And then if you happen to live in one of these states, and they're pretty big states: Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Maine, Connecticut, Maryland, Washington D.C. Like they're big states, but it's not consistent across the board. Even within some of those states, there are small communities that have still decided to be regulated, even though the whole state is
Mm.
deregulated. And so you have to sort of like at an address level, you have to put in your address
Yeah.
into a tool like WattBuy
So it's
and figure it
so
out.
it's so it's a bit of a mess, but that's
It,
okay.
it
I mean,
it's
I think,
it absolutely, it's a mess. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a little bit like the electricity system generally.
yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of, I'm really excited. I've talked to a number of people in this, transmission and the distribution space and how electricity goes around the grid. It's just super fascinating, obviously extremely complicated, but it will be interesting to see this next decade, how that evolves. Um,
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity that just happened, with Texas. I mean, what a tragedy that was happening in Texas in February with the winter storms. But it showed a lot of people like an opportunity for what we can do to kind of create a more resilient grid. I love seeing like the battery. There's been a few sort of like Tesla battery announcements that have come out since then in Texas. So the battery technology and the distributed generation technology with solar, like really can like completely reimagine like the electricity grid, and then coupled with home automation technologies and Internet of Things technologies, we might be able to like have all the comforts that we have right now without being just stupid about it, without just keeping the air conditioning on all the time. Like if I walk out the door, yeah, I want my air conditioning to go off, and then when I'm coming back home, I want it to come back on. And we're getting to that point where enough of the technologies are all kind of working together so that we can start to create like this this future Jetsons type of
Yeah.
scenario where our house responds to us instead of us having to fiddle with our house.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, this is interesting. I think getting towards the end of the podcast here is I'm curious to understand like when you're talking about IoT and all this data points, right? Obviously your business is essentially based off of understanding data. What do you see as kind of the big, I would say maybe the big two or three things that you feel are going to happen in the future here as data becomes, start to enable individual purchasers of electricity and just throughout the U.S. Energy grid? What do you see as kind of the big things that will change and that will happen that you're excited for?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things will be the distributed generation and battery technologies in each house, so that people can sort of just like Elon Musk said, create a power plant at your house. So that you don't have to worry so much. I mean, a lot of people, my folks are not technologically advanced, but when they had an ice storm, their electricity went out, so they got themselves an app connected like generator so that it can come online whenever they lose their electricity. A lot of people are seeing that like as we become more technologically enabled, we are just not willing to have to sit in the house with the lights off for any amount of time. So we're creating the backups that allow us to do that. And then, but if you go ahead and get yourself a battery, then and you're doing it for blackouts, then you also have an opportunity to shape your electricity curve over time, and shave off those peak
Mm-hmm.
events. So just I'll get it for the one thing, I'll get it for the blackouts, but then I'll go ahead and use it for peak shaving, and I can actually start to save money. We found some wonderful stuff that in Texas, if you deployed your a battery, you could install batteries for about $450 per kilowatt hour, but you could actually make on the spot market, you could make about $300 per kilowatt hour per year. So that's actually starting to pay for itself in a couple of years, and you have all the benefits of having this backup battery. So I think we're going to start to see all of that, so that people can actually, people won't be making those decisions. Just like on my iPhone, I say low battery mode. I want to be able to say to my house, low battery mode, low house mode, low
Mm-hmm.
energy mode. And so then it just does it on its own, and then I don't have to think about it at all, so that I can get all of the benefits of this automated technology without having to worry about what I'm doing with it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's something I've always been interested in. I grew up in a very rural area in the middle of nowhere, so we had very, very different upbringing than most people. But this whole smart technology type of thing to me has always been interesting, and I think a lot of people, are concerned that it's going to be too expensive to install. But my understanding is that in the long run, these things are going to pay off for everybody. So I think it's maybe in the incentive of the homeowners or probably the home builders, because people move around a lot these days, right? To just put it into the house so they can sell it for a premium.
Absolutely, and we're working with a couple of kind of real estate companies about doing some of this, because when a company is worried about like house electricity, like they can do the calculations and say like, okay, yeah, do we put in a Nest thermostat? Do we put in an Ecobee thermostat? how much does it cost, and then how much do we get back on the back end. So if you have a company that's owning these houses and paying for electricity, then they're already in that kind of thought process. But homeowners are not always thinking about it. We are doing with our electricity curve, electricity usage curves that we're generating. We're also doing a little bit of that with, how much time does it take for you to pay off like an ecobee thermostat if you do that, because we're assuming that you're going to save whatever the 13% off of your HVAC cost, and just doing the math for them. No reason for somebody else to do the math. Like we've already got all the inputs that we need, and we are finding consistently that an ecobee thermostat will pay itself off in 4 to 8 months. That the LED light bulbs are paying themselves off in 2 or 3 months. So we're pulling more products into that. But you're absolutely right. Like getting the right information, doing the math for people, and showing them like, yes, there will be $150 sort of like initial investment, but you're going to be able to pay that off in just a few short months, and you're going to have a better, like a more comfortable existence while you're doing it. Like that seems like a win-win-win.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's part of the reason behind this whole podcast is, again, grew up in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't know much about clean tech and renewable energy and all that stuff, and it was always kind of downplayed as like, oh, that's just going to kill the economy, right? But it's like everybody I've had on this show, all of the companies have all done absolutely incredible things where there is no loser. Like, it's cheaper.
That's right.
It's better for the environment. It creates more jobs. Like, all of the positives, just bam, 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 right after the next. So I think that it's just important what you guys are doing. It's exciting to see, that you're empowering people with the data to understand the decisions that they have to make. And, once one person does it, they tell their neighbor, and it just kind of like snowballs like this. And before you know it, we'll all be able to make these well-informed decisions. So,
Absolutely.
Well, great for what you guys are doing. Is there anything else you wanted to just end, any other things you wanted to finish up with, any notes you want to leave the audience with?
I want people to know that they can take charge of their electricity, that that the residential electricity usage is 50%, is about 50% of the usage in the US. And for us to get to sort of like a clean carbon, like a clean energy economy, like it's going to absolutely require us to figure things out on the residential side. We're not just going to be able to turn off industrial or commercial stuff and get there. And so I'm pretty excited that the tools are starting to become available for people, so that they can make these decisions. But it's going to take all of us to kind of get to this like low or carbon neutral kind of economy. And so I'm excited that we're going to see it like in just a few short years.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I haven't even thought about that, because business owners, obviously, they run their business with P&L in mind, and homeowners, obviously, they try to manage their budget. But I feel like oftentimes, if it's not right in front of them, they're not going to be able to have the opportunity to do so. They're not going to think about it, right?
That's right.
They're just going to do it. So we all need to work together. So great work on what you guys are doing. Obviously, excited to see the advancements and kind of the future of what partnerships you guys develop. I know that this whole clean tech renewable energy space is just full of amazing partnerships. So it's going to be exciting to see. But thanks so much for coming on, Ben. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining today's episode of the podcast. Hope you found it very interesting, and hope you found a lot of value in it. As always, would love to hear your thoughts on the episode. So if you're able to, share your comments on social media, regardless of where you saw this, or feel free to tweet me directly at Silas Maynor on Twitter. You can also email me as well. And potentially, if you're interested in having more of an in-depth conversation, or maybe have some questions about anything that was mentioned, definitely join the Slack channel, link in the description, to have a dialogue with any of the folks who are there who have some interest in the space. I will say too, there's another Slack channel that I know of that's quite interesting, called DER Task Force, that talks about a lot of things that were mentioned in this podcast. Very, very, very in-depth type of discussion going on there. So a lot of times it's over my head. But if you're a nerd for this type of stuff, definitely feel free to check that out as well. The team at David Energy is the one who runs that Slack channel. So very interesting stuff what's going on there. Also, definitely it'd be very helpful if you share this with a friend, right? It can be a great way to spread the word about what's going on in the space, what's going on in the industry. Then it allows you two to have a conversation about some of the questions that may have come up during the episode, and just kind of hash out and understand and formalize some of those things that we've discussed. And again, maybe there's some questions that come up. Feel free to reach out. I'm always glad to hear feedback from from everybody on these things. Would like to make sure I have notes down for any questions to ask in the future. Also, definitely please consider subscribing to our monthly newsletter. CleanTechies, the newsletter, goes out every month on the 27th of the month. And usually what we're doing is just diving into one specific area of climate tech, kind of just addressing a certain issue or a certain technology, and then doing a little bit of a deep dive into some of the companies solving those problems. So it's a little bit different content, obviously, for more of the reader, but definitely consider subscribing to that. That'll be coming up in a couple weeks here. And other than that, thank you guys so much for listening. We really, really do appreciate your listenership. We appreciate all the support. So as always, we'll see you next time on CleanTechies, the podcast.